Today, I want to talk about how to help the people around you help you study for the GMAT better, how to get more support from the folks around you as you're going through this process. Now, if you have a spouse or a friend or family members who are around you who maybe aren't necessarily understanding what you're going through in this process, feel free to send them this episode. I'm going to talk directly to those folks here. And if you're alone in this process and you're studying and you're struggling, then this is also hopefully going to help you out and just let you know you're not alone in this process. Now, if you're not struggling and everything is going fantastic and great, and you're just absolutely crushing it with everything going great, all green lights, then feel free to skip this episode. This probably isn't going to resonate with you, but if you're curious, I am about to dive into what the people around us should know when we are studying for the exam. I want to start by addressing the fact that online it can seem like everybody is crushing the GMAT, which is not true. Think about who's incentivized to post things on the internet. Either people who are doing super, super well and they just want to feel great about themselves and capitalize on their success, or people who are doing super, super badly and are really looking for help. And which one is the easier person to be? And which is going to be the easier post to write? Which post would all of us be more likely to write? So I just want you to know that when you're on certain forums, you're not getting an accurate cross section of what GMAT studying is like. You're getting the huge extremes of GMAT studying. And social media could be a good parallel here. Are people incentivized to post about their regular day-to-day lives? Well, they're not incentivized to do that as much as they're incentivized to post only about things that are going great or post only when things are going great or just make it seem like everything is great 100% of the time. Now, is everybody doing that? Obviously not. I'm just telling you what is likely behind a lot of what you're seeing in terms of quote unquote GMAT community online. Now, let's also think about the other people who are incentivized to create a potentially unrealistic view of what GMAT studying might look like. Many GMAT companies are incentivized to say, hey, check out our student who got a 790 in 2 weeks. And guess what? You can too. Buy my product now. Now, there's nothing wrong with a great pitch. In fact, virtually all of us understand, respect, and maybe even admire salespeople who have mastered their craft, who do a great job walking people through the buying process. Many of us respect great marketing. Many of us are business people, marketers, salespeople ourselves. This is partly what's brought us here in the first place. But just recognize that there's a lot of these sort of clickbaity style headlines in the GMAT space that are worth being skeptical of. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying you shouldn't believe these people, and I'm not saying you shouldn't buy their products. In fact, I've recommended many other providers' products in the space in multiple episodes across time. And I think that that's important. That's an important thing. There should be as unbiased as possible of recommendations out there for people. And what I'm trying to say is like a lot of people on the internet are biased because their incentives are not aligned with your personal incentives. Okay. Now, even though there are some of those headlines out there, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in that same position that that person was in when that person got a 790 in 2 weeks, if that is even legit in the first place. But let's just assume that nobody's lying and that actually happened. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's not. The thing to think about is yes, there are phenomenal providers in the GMAT space who probably can help you get way faster, way better results. But if you're thinking that's going to happen for like $200 without any customized support and a coach who's going to be walking you through every single thing and detail of your process and helping you re-optimize on a regular basis, even with that, a 790 in 2 weeks might just be totally unrealistic. So what I'm trying to say is for the vast majority of people, let's call it 80%, the middle 80% of people, this test is going to be potentially the hardest test that they've ever taken. It's going to be a huge struggle. They're going to feel very alone when they read about the people who got a 790 in 2 weeks. And they're going to start to just mistrust everything on the internet. And who can blame them? Who can blame them for that? That's probably what they should be doing. Now, the thing I want to talk about is how that could change your identity if you're not careful in a negative way. And I'm going to walk you through some of the reasons that this happens and try to show you that it's actually not you that is the problem. And it's not that you're not talented enough. It's not that everybody's smarter than you. It's not that you're not cut out for this. It's that the exam itself is very, very different than typical tests. And the market dynamics that surround the exam encourage a bit of delusion about the process. And that's why I was talking about the incentives. How are the incentives aligned in this situation? So I want to do some dispelling of some common myths. And I want to speak to you very directly if this process has been difficult for you, or if you're feeling like it's a little or a lot more difficult than you were expecting it to be. There's actually a lot of explainable reasons for that. And I think when you understand those reasons and you have a realistic view of the landscape here, it's going to help you progress faster, and it's just going to get you better results, and it's going to make the process a lot less painful. And that is my role in your prep. Number one, and the most important thing, whether you're this person who's struggling or whether you are close to this person who's struggling and they've shared this episode with you in hopes that you can help them progress better and win as a team together. This is what most of us are here to do. The number one thing that you want to understand is that the GMAT is not like other exams. It looks like other exams, and that can be very, very confusing. In fact, you can't fault yourself for looking at the GMAT and thinking, oh, cool, standardized test. I've taken standardized tests in my life. This is going to be no big deal. Or this was a big deal in the past, but I did X, Y, and Z. So if I just do X, Y, and Z on this test, I should get exactly the same results. And many of you, unfortunately, and I was in this position, have already realized that that's not true. And that all of a sudden you're fighting a battle that you don't understand and you're not sure what to do about that. We'll get into some specifics in a minute, but for now, it's just important to understand the reality that even though the test looks like other tests, it is not. It's scored totally differently. I'll talk to you about that in a second. And it does not simply require just learning the material and practicing a lot, like a lot of other skills do. Becoming great at Excel, for the most part, I think most of us would agree, it's learning the stuff and practicing. Becoming a better softball player, learning the skills and practicing. Becoming great at the SAT, learning the skills and practicing. All of a sudden, the GMAT is a totally different competitive landscape. So it requires a major psychological restructuring of how you take a test and also how you evaluate your progress in the process. And once you understand that, you will hopefully start to understand why this process is so challenging for so many people, and so many people who have never struggled academically in the past or just struggled very little in the past. For example, most tests, if not all tests out there outside of the GMAT, are based on accuracy. How do you know you did well on your last college final exam? Well, you were right 90% of the time and wrong only 10% of the time. The GMAT is not based strictly on accuracy. In fact, many people are getting the exact same accuracy, yet wildly different scores. So like 70% right and 30% wrong on your last college final exam might have put you into a depression for several weeks. Whereas on the GMAT, 70% right, 30% wrong could mean you're outscoring 98% of other people on the exam. Let me explain. The GMAT is going to score you and measure your performance based on the difficulty level of questions that you see, where in the section you get questions right or wrong. Are you getting them right or wrong at the beginning? Are you getting them right or wrong at the end? And a variety of other factors that GMAC, the people who write the GMAT, don't even share publicly. It's a proprietary algorithm that many people in the industry over many, many years have had to reverse engineer and conduct fairly extensive research projects to really understand and help people. So I don't want to make the test seem harder than it is. I just want to help you make the transition to thinking about it accurately so that you can start to make the gains that you want to see. All the effort in the world is probably not going to save you from trying to find a place in Chicago using a map of Detroit. Like that's just not going to go well. I think all of us can hopefully understand that. So what I'm trying to say is it's a surmountable process, but it's not as simple as it might appear on the surface. I think everyone should know this going into the test, both the people who are studying and the people around them, because people assume, well, if I just study, I'll do well. Like input equals output. If I'm putting in the hours, my score should be going up. I want to really re-emphasize this. This is super important if you've done extremely well on tests in the past and you're not doing well on the GMAT. I do want to acknowledge that some of you are going to study for 2 weeks and get a 790. That's awesome. Good for you. I want you to understand you have a gift. That is a huge talent that most people do not possess. The vast majority of people are not able to perform like that on the GMAT. And you can do what you want with that gift. And the process is going to be easier for you in that regard. There may be other challenges that you personally are facing in the process or downstream, either in MBA programs or after. Or maybe you're going to cruise through your career and that's not going to be a pain point for you in your life. Again, that's not most people. That's probably 0.1 to 0.01% of the GMAT population, if that. You also might be someone who's relatively talented, or maybe you've struggled with standardized tests in the past, even though you're a great student and you're very intelligent. And maybe you're around a lot of people at work who either aren't being honest with you, it's possible, or they're just those super talented people. And you might start to get a distorted view of what the GMAT community looks like just because you happen to be around a bunch of superstars when it comes to standardized tests. So for, let's call it 90% of people conservatively, the test is going to feel way different than you think it's going to feel, even after a lot of studying. Your hours put in are not probably linearly going to track to the score like you're used to seeing, like maybe in the gym or as an athlete. You're like, okay, I put in the time, I improved. I put in the miles, I got in better shape and I got a better race time. Even those things are debatably linear, but you hopefully understand what I'm saying. Like there's a pretty observable link between the effort I put in and the result I get out. This test can go the opposite way. You might be putting in all the hours, all the effort, being super diligent with your study time, and you might see your score go down. That happened to me. I'll share my story, a little bit of my story in a sec. In fact, let's jump into that right now. Just to make this point, I'm not sharing this for any other reason other than I think it's going to help you. So I was a very talented student in high school. I also worked extremely hard and I was very organized and very motivated. I got offers to go to several Ivy League schools for undergraduate. I ended up going to state schools. It was a purely financial decision. And I got into UC Berkeley's engineering program, which is extremely competitive. It's actually much more difficult and selective to get into than the regular UC Berkeley program. And basically, along with Stanford, is like the gateway to these Silicon Valley jobs, the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks. He got kids basically coming out of college making $330,000 a year maintaining the PayPal code base. You know, this is it's a very interesting slice of humanity. Okay. So I had a 4.3 GPA in high school, honors, captain of sports team, like that stuff. Never struggled with a test. Once actually, when I was in middle school, I went to like an alternative elementary school where it wasn't like the sort of standardized curriculum. And then when I went to a public middle school, I had never taken a test for a grade. So I got a C plus on my first test. Fortunately, I had an amazing teacher. She walked me through like, okay, this is how grades work, young man. You're in a different world now. And then from that point forward, I mean, I don't even know if I ever got anything less than a B plus. And even that was pretty rare. So again, I'm just sharing this for you. Okay. I'm not trying to, I don't know. I don't even know how to address this, but I think this is going to be helpful for you. All right. My guidance counselor recommended that I work for a tutoring company that was popular. She actually referred me to them directly without even telling me about it. And then she was like, oh, by the way, these guys have a job offer for you. I did very well in that. It's part of the reason I stayed in education. I got a lot of positive feedback on my teaching. I studied hard for the GMAT. I took a baseline test. I studied hard for 6 months, minimum 20 hours a week. I also had a full-time job, social life, all those things. 20 to 30 hours a week was probably my average. Some weeks I probably did more if I had some vacation days. After 6 months of that, going through every question in the official guide, a third-party prep provider's entire curriculum, start to finish, all the notes, all the practice problems, all the flashcards, my score went down 10 points after all that. My next practice test, I regrouped, score went down 10 points again. All right. So my 7 months of study at that point and ruthless self-analysis had earned me a 20-point decrease in my score. Now, things got worse before they got better. I'll spare you the rest of that. But what I'm trying to say is even extremely talented people can fail to perform well on the GMAT despite their best intentions and best efforts because they just don't understand the competitive landscape that they're on. Imagine you've been working on becoming a better tennis player for your entire life, and then all of a sudden, to get to the next level of your career, you have to become great at volleyball. Well, yeah, a few things are going to translate, like basic physical fitness and things like that are going to translate. But if you go try to win a volleyball game using the rules of tennis, like you're gonna lose. It's just I mean, maybe in the weirdest, craziest probabilistic outcome, you win the game anyway somehow. Sure, we could come up with all the edge cases, but let's be honest, like that is crazy. It's crazy to try to do that. But that is what is happening to a lot of people when they're studying for the GMAT without knowing it. Obviously, you wouldn't do that consciously, but you might be doing it unconsciously. And I want to help shed light on that for you today. So, what should you do if this is you in this situation, or if this is happening to a loved one of yours, or someone you share your house with, or a friend? Someone is studying for the GMAT and you found this, or they shared it with you. What can you do? Number one, recognize that they are struggling. Okay. They may have never struggled with something like this up until this point. So it's going to be a big challenge for them. And they might have a lot of their identity attached to doing well academically. That was definitely the case for me. Like I had in some ways like a total realignment of my identity. Like, wait, am I just not the person I thought I was? Was all of this a sham leading up to this point? Was the high school I went to just inflating my grades? Was college inflating my grades? Um, it was a difficult time. So that's the mindset. The tactics are learning to be a better listener can be really valuable for other people going through this process. Now, this is a huge and deep topic. There's probably like a million seminars on this, but I'll give you the nuts and bolts of what I've found to be most useful. And most of the time, when people are talking to you about the challenges they're facing with the GMAT or how they're struggling or maybe how they're working hard, but they're not seeing the results they want, they're just trying to get the feelings out. And they're probably not looking for your advice. Now, I might be wrong about this, but usually they're not. Usually they just want to be heard. They want to process the emotions with another human being and just feel understood. So if you're not sure, if someone's venting to you about the GMAT and you're not sure how to respond, you can just ask, well, do you just want me to listen or are you looking for advice? Like you can just straight up ask people that. Most people are going to tell you, honestly, I'd really just love you to hear me out on this. And usually what works well if someone says that to you, if you're not sure how to make people feel heard, is tell them what they're saying makes sense. If it does, don't lie. If something doesn't make sense or you don't understand it, ask clarifying questions. But as soon as it makes sense to you, tell them that it makes sense. Because a lot of times, I don't know what the right way to say this, but there can be very negative conditioning around expressing our emotions as people. And sometimes our emotions seem irrational to us when in reality they're totally rational. And subconsciously, for most people, it's very helpful to just validate like what they're going through is not totally crazy and they're not totally disconnected from reality. I'm not a psychologist. None of this is medical advice. I'm not qualified to give medical advice. I'm just telling you what I have seen work best. Okay. Once you tell them that it makes sense, it's great to follow up with just mirroring the feeling that you're getting. Something like, it sounds like you're really struggling with this. Or, wow, I can tell this is really hard for you. Just something as simple as that, just labeling the emotion. This is actually, if you're a business person, this is a popular, I don't know, like negotiating strategy. I don't know, that's the wrong word, but like if you've read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss or done his master class, he talks about labeling emotions can really help people process their feelings and come to a more reasonable state of mind if they're having a difficult time emotionally. So it's a valuable skill, a valuable skill. Now I'm just giving you the super thin slice of it. Again, it's a super deep topic. If you're interested in becoming a better leader, I'd strongly recommend you go down the path of scholarship and literature with this. But that's kind of the basics, nuts and bolts. You can get going and deploy that today, kind of thing. That'll help a lot. And the people studying for the GMAT are people around you who are struggling with a difficult time in their life. Generally, will appreciate that as long as it's done from a place of sincerity. It's not going to work if you're using it like just a tactic and you're not actually like listening to the person and hearing and empathizing with them. If you're just doing it like a robot, it's probably not going to go over well. So instead, better to just say nothing at all. Or you can stick with the got it or that makes sense. Okay, so that's step number one if you want to support your peeps who are studying for the GMAT. Second, unfortunately, you probably won't be able to give very good advice to the person because all of your study experience is going to be with different kinds of exams that are based on accuracy. So my strongest advice is avoid saying like, well, when I was studying for the CFA or when I did my certification for blank, because unfortunately, it is not relevant. If you struggled with those exams, then you can share that story of struggle, but please don't just tell them, "Oh, I just made a lot of flashcards and that worked for me." That could take someone in the totally wrong direction of what they need to do well and do better on the GMAT. Because tests like the CFA, for example, is heavy on memorization. You got to know the law. There's I haven't studied for the CFA, but I'm loosely familiar with it. I work with a lot of people who have FINRA exams. If you've done your series exams, a lot of that is very memorization and very knowledge based. It's a certification like, do you know the stuff that we need you to know? If you memorize the stuff and you do the practice questions, you will typically get a great score. The GMAT, if you memorize a bunch of stuff and do a bunch of practice problems, your score might go down. I told you my story, and this is you could go online and you could search any forum and you could probably find at least 3 super sob stories very similar to mine. I came out of it, I figured it out. This is why I'm here, helping folks who might be in this situation. I did very, very well eventually. You can too, but it might require a major strategic shift and it might take longer than the as advertised pace out there by some providers. Just saying. Okay. So the next thing is expect some score drops. This is extremely common. You might nail the material and maybe just lose the mental game on that particular day. You might not have slept well. You might get distracted. You might just have a lot of diligence to do to figure out what is holding you back personally. Maybe it's not the material. Maybe your strategy needs a major revision. Maybe you're struggling with timing. Maybe you're missing a lot of questions you know how to do. These are very common things that hold people back. It's a significant challenge for a lot of people, especially if you're used to having success with minimal effort. Like, oh, you glance at the stuff, ace the exam. Again, that might be you. You might crush the GMAT. It's not typical. Now, all of a sudden, most of these folks, myself included, they're in a much more competitive pool. It's a totally different competitive landscape and it can be a difficult adjustment. So the emotions can be tough, especially when you see the score go down if you've been grinding hard. Those setbacks can be your most valuable asset. You can learn the most from those setbacks and those exams, and they can be the number one thing that brings you closer to success if you can accept and understand that sometimes that is what the learning process looks like. And this particularly goes for all of you who are self-studying. If you have a coach and you have a great coach, then you're much more likely to see those score drops. But even then, sometimes it can happen. A lot of times you're just struggling on a path where you're on your way to a totally higher level of existence and a totally different version of yourself. You're going to be more valuable to the people around you. You're going to be making a larger contribution to civilization and society and communities. You're probably going to be earning more money. I know that's not the case 100%, and I know some of you are in this for other reasons, but odds are you will probably earn more money. People might look at you differently. It's a huge level up, for lack of a better expression. And whether you're the person going through this or whether you're the person observing and supporting the people going through this, you are going to be able to share that with people, or you are going to have that shared with you, and it's going to be awesome. You're going to be super proud of yourself. You're going to be super proud of your special person who you're watching go through this process. But for most of us, we can't be a hero unless we fight a monster. And so sometimes you're going to be fighting the monster and you're not going to be winning that fight. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to get scratched up. You're going to get banged up. You might get the metaphorical arm broken and have to fight your way out of it one-handed. A lot of times that's how it feels. It can be a state of despair. That's particularly true of score drops. Now, I want to dig into the emotional side of this because a lot of the material out there around this stuff is very intellectual. And there's a couple reasons for that, but that's neither good nor bad. Some people are going to respond to the more intellectual approach, but I really want to meet the emotional piece head on with this. All that means if your score goes down, everybody, is your skills need to improve. You either need to build the skill of getting questions right. You need to build the skill of studying more efficiently. You might need to build the skill of managing your time better. Or it might be none of those things. You might need to build the skill of handling your anxiety better. That's something you might want a personal coach for, or you might want to read a book for, or you might want to do some research on, or you might want to go to a sports psychologist. There's a lot of options available, but it's still a skill. It's a learnable thing handling that. Again, none of this is medical advice. It's just what I've seen work for over 10,000 people at this point, if you can believe that. I really want to emphasize this next piece. If your score goes down, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean business school is not for you. It doesn't mean you need to give up. It probably means you need to change your approach. You just need to be honest with yourself, review the exam, figure out why the score went down, and confront whatever the skill gap is as head on as you possibly can. This is a huge reason why I made TGS. If your score went down, then listen to the advice I give in the podcast. Start with the stuff from this year, 2024. It's the most relevant to the current exam. And if you want more, you can go back to our older episodes. Most of that's going to have the specific question numbers from the old exam, but a lot of the advice is still super relevant, especially the mental game stuff, motivation, how to optimize your life better. All those things still apply just as well as they always have. Some of those things you might have listened to, but you might benefit from re-listening to them. You might have been on the bike ride and the car was getting a little too close to you. You might have been at the gym and seen that special attractive person who just they get a lot of attention, It's just part of the human experience. Might have missed out on what I was telling you in that moment. Believe me, I understand. I don't take it personally. I'm human too. So just a suggestion. Might be worth going back and listening to the pods that are on the things that you personally are grappling with and struggling with. And if you're really stuck, feel free to reach out. We're on current social channels and we do our best to keep up with DM replies. Now, one last thing I'll say about that is I'll use a dieting analogy. Like every diet works, it just doesn't work when you don't stick to the diet. So if you have the knowledge and you're not applying the knowledge, that's also another skill gap that can be addressed. It's like if you get under pressure and all of a sudden your scratch work technique that's perfect in practice buckles and you end up missing a lot of questions, you just need to build your skill of dealing with the time pressure better, handling your scratch work under pressure better. And there's a lot you can do to grow those things. But if your score's going down, it doesn't mean that it's something inherent with you. It means you have a skill gap to close. Maybe you need some professional help, or maybe you just need to have an honest conversation with yourself. All right. For those of you who are watching other people go through this can help you have empathy for them because a lot of the folks who go to MBA programs tend to be a very self-selecting group. They are achievers. A lot of their self-worth is based on their achievements, positive feedback, recognition. None of this is good or bad, everybody. This is just part of being human. And there's different people respond to different things. A lot of us are the type A achiever. We've gotten a lot of recognition, a lot of reward. We might conflate being loved and worthy with the number on the computer screen when we finish the GMAT practice test. I just want you to know you're not alone in that, if that's you. And if that's not you, that's cool too. But that's very, very common. And if you're watching someone go through this, it's helpful to know that like they feel like their sense of self is collapsing. Even if they're aware of what I'm talking about, that it's a skill gap, you might see some people go through some stuff and you might see a side of them that's just difficult and vulnerable, especially if you're a significant other of someone studying for this. And just understanding that can help you just be in the struggle with them, because what's happening there is their old self is getting broken down a little bit and it's making way for the new self. Um, I guess I'll just address this since I'm on the topic. Um, I had a difficult upbringing, and I won't go into too many of the details because everything's relative. And I know many of you out there have had it 100 times worse than me, depending on the criteria. Many of you have had it 100 times better, and everybody in between. But the fact of the matter is, most of us experience the worst thing that has ever happened to us as the worst thing that has ever happened to us. And that is relative to our experience. Okay. So I went through some really difficult stuff, unusually difficult. And I actually got into a support group. I was a little embarrassed to go in person, so I got into it online. And someone said something really, really interesting about traumatic loss of people we love. And this person's had lost a parent to suicide. And she was talking about how she thought the healing process was a process of returning to the person she was before she lost her loved one. And what she ultimately realized is that was impossible. She was never going to go back to the person she was before that happened. There was just no way. What she realized instead is that the healing process is a process of progressing from where you are and integrating that event into your life going forward and accepting that you now are this different version of you. Many of the parts of you are the same, but some parts of you are irrevocably changed and you're not going back to that person you were before. And that's okay, because if you're listening to this, you're probably an adult and you probably have agency in choosing what kind of qualities you want to develop, what kind of skills you want to develop, how you want to treat other people, what kind of books you read, etc. And I'm, again, none of this is medical or psychiatric advice. Definitely seek the advice of a professional if you're in a difficult situation. Again, just sharing what I've seen work for the most number of people. Some of you are going through that breaking down process, admittedly, not to the extent that if you lost a parent or a loved one, but it might feel that uh, unsettling or similarly unsettling, especially if you've had traumatic loss in the past, because new grief can trigger old grief. And all of a sudden, it can feel like the world is crashing in on you, when in reality, you're just studying for a difficult standardized test. And a lot of people are struggling, which makes sense. So, one thing you can do, whether you're in the situation or outside the situation, is just understand that it's a transformation. And that actually could theoretically be a good thing if it's managed properly. And that's why I'm making this episode for you. Because if it's judged or if it's criticized or if it's shut down, then it can lead to this sort of internalized shame. And that can be very counterproductive. And ideally, we don't want that. That's going to make studying and progressing a lot harder. And it just inhibits the healing process. Whereas if everybody in the situation accepts, like, okay, this is a really tough thing you're going through, this is going to make you better. You might be having to let go of some things that you've held on to for a long time, and you're making room in your psyche and in yourself for new skills, new ways of thinking, being more empathetic, understanding struggle and what it takes to be successful better. All of those things can be great things. They might not feel great as you're going through them. One of my coaches always says, Isaac, this is what hard feels like. And you know what? It's helpful. It's helpful because realistically, I don't expect most of my ambitions to be easy. I expect them to be maybe impossible. Some of the things that I want to see happen in the world might honestly not be possible, everybody. I'm still giving them a shot. I'm going to see, I'm going to prove it to myself one way or the other as much as I can. But how's that going to feel if I wake up every day and try to do a bunch of impossible stuff? I'm probably going to fail a lot more often than I succeed. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. And that's really important. Those of you who are in venture capital or in the investing space can really relate to this. You might lose 9 out of 10 bets, but that 1 out of 10 bet might make you rich beyond your wildest dreams, and everybody around you might make all their dreams come true too. All of a sudden, you can give to charity, you can start the foundation, you can build the dream home, you can send the kids to the school you want them to go to. Money is definitely not everything, but let's be honest, it's a huge part of the modern world, and it gives us access to many things that are very difficult, if not impossible, to access without it. So it's just a different way of experiencing life. So let me wrap all of this up because I know I kind of went deep there and I wasn't planning to talk about that. But just if you're that person out there who needed to hear that, that's for you. And if you didn't need to hear that and I made you uncomfortable, I apologize. That wasn't my intention. Just trying to be as helpful as I can be for the community at large. So if you're in the middle of that process, it's good to recognize that maybe if you're feeling that bad, you're doing it right. Maybe you're just in a season of hard, and this is what hard feels like, and you're going to make it. You're not going to give up. You're going to figure out a way to change your approach, build the new skill, and make it happen. Some of you might just decide this is not worth it. Some investments are just too expensive, and maybe there's another way for you to get your goal, and that's fine. Anyone who's studied for this thing hardcore is going to understand that completely, and maybe it's time for you to let go of your judgment and tap out of the game. But for most of you, it is not that time. It's time to rally the troops and attack from another angle, okay? So just want you to know that if you're getting hit that hard, many have gone before you and that has happened, and they have become stronger, better, more awesome versions of themselves as a result. And they became heroes because of the monsters they fought, not because they somehow slid past the monster sneakily without doing anything heroic at all and then just seemed like a hero. That's not who I'm talking about here, okay? So this might just be you in your hero's journey, and it might just be a compelling chapter of the story that you're writing for yourself in your life. Something to consider. Next up, tactics. If you don't sleep well, then you might have to look at your sleep routine. If you miss a bunch of questions you know how to do, you might have to start building new habits to keep that from happening under time pressure. If you don't change, you don't grow. So this change process might just be you letting go of some old habits that aren't serving you anymore on the exam and teaching you how you can level up. So this is why I was leaning on most people just need time and a friendly ear to support them and be with them in the process so they're not totally alone. It's like imagine if you see your friend fighting a monster, what are you going to do? Well, if you know they need to fight that monster to get what they want, hopefully you're going to at least say, you can do it. Maybe you pick up a sword and help them fight. Or maybe you tell them to run. I don't know. But what people need when they're facing the GMAT is they need time and they just need someone to allow them to struggle with it and be there with them in that struggle. So the key is you just don't want to leave them high and dry just because they're struggling for the first time in their academic life. If you're just with them in the struggle and you make them feel heard and you make them feel like they're not crazy and you say, hey, is this important enough for you to keep going through this? And they say yes, then you think, great, what can I do to help out? And the main point I want to segue to there is you might feel a strong instinct to try to fix the problem for them. And it's really important in most situations that you not do that and you just allow them to struggle because that's how they're going to get better. And that impulse to fix the problem by giving advice, just be like maybe what they're going through is making you uncomfortable. Just observing them going through it is really hard for you. Think about it this way. If you went to the gym and you saw your friend struggling in the gym to lift the weight, but it seemed like they were okay. They weren't about to injure themselves. Would you run over and help them lift the weight? Probably not, because that probably wouldn't be helpful. You're interrupting the most important part of their working set. That's the part where they're getting the most benefit from the exercise, is the hard part. So that might be difficult to do, but don't interrupt their growth process. Just let them know you're there to listen if they want to share, and let them know that you think what they're doing is cool, or whatever is honest for you. Like, hey man, honestly, I don't understand why you're struggling with this so much, because I just want to live my life the chill way. But I actually think it's pretty cool that you're going after what you want. And like, I'm here for you, man. If you want to talk about it, let me know. Otherwise, like, shouldn't you be studying right now? You know? Most of us just need to sweat this thing out. We just need to stay in the game long enough so that we can change our approach for the third time, fourth time, fifth time, and get the breakthrough that we've been looking for. All right. Next point, along with that and related to that, is this is probably going to take a lot longer than either of you want it to, whether you're the person doing it or whether you're the observer watching someone go through it. They might complain, the person studying, they might miss important things. They might say they're going to be done by June and it'll stretch on into December. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't want to discourage any of you who are trying to make fast progress. That's definitely possible. People do it all the time. There's many great ways to optimize your performance. I wouldn't be making this podcast for you if I didn't think that was possible. Certainly wouldn't have made the other ones. So the key there is just to expect that. Just to treat it like building a house or like a construction project, if you've ever been through that, or someone setting a deadline at work where you roll your eyes internally and you're like, dude, that's never going to happen. If you expect it and then it drags on, it won't be as bad. Versus if you expect it's going to be 3 months and then it turns out to be 6, that can make things a lot harder than they're supposed to be. So the key within that, if you're watching someone struggle with it, is, and you normally spend a lot of time with that person, is occupy yourself. That's how you can support them, is give them the space to do the work so that they can get in better mental shape and do the skill gains that they need. The worst thing you can do is nag them and say, hey, you said this. I was expecting you to be at this. You're not there. Now, if they said they were going to be there and they broke their word with you, then you should confront them on that for sure. None of us should be the type of people who break our word consciously. That's not leadership, everybody. That's the opposite of leadership. How do you look at leaders who consistently break their word? You don't trust them at all. That's bad leadership. Now, it's very difficult to keep your word 100% of the time. Most people are going to make mistakes, they're going to slip, but confronting that, being honest about it, having a sincere conversation about it, making new agreements, figuring out a more realistic plan together, that is part of great leadership. I don't know any great leaders who are perfect. Never met one. Don't think those people exist. In fact, many great leaders are the most flawed people, but they've built the leadership skills that are required to do the thing. Doesn't mean they're perfect people. It just means they built the skill set. Keeping commitments is a huge, huge part of that skill set. So don't be breaking your word with people or making commitments that you can't keep. And some things are more important than GMAT study. If you said you were going to be at the wedding, you should probably go to the wedding. That's a one-time in a life thing. It's okay to delay your studies by a week to be there for the important things, but just make sure you're prioritizing accurately. And if the person said they weren't going to go to the weddings because they're studying for the GMAT, don't be that negative person complaining that they're not going to the wedding. They were honest with you. They said they weren't going to be available. And if you nag them about it, that's going to undermine your whole relationship with this person because you're not supporting their goals. You're not being an asset to them. You're being a liability. That's counterproductive. It's going to take them even longer. It's going to create more drama, none of which is going to get you what you want in the situation. All right. So you can complain to your buddies about how you don't like what they're doing, but only confront them if it's a legitimate problem with them. If you're the person observing, spend that time doing your own hobby. Grow your own personal skills that you've been waiting. Study a new subject. Build a new skill yourself. Reconnect with your old friends. Read more. Whatever you need to do, just do something fun. Start to make yourself better, and that'll be you being a great example for your friend who's studying, and it'll help you be in it together more. All right? Now, if you have a very close relationship, make sure that you cut out the time and pre-commit in a time that works for both of you, where you can shut everything off and connect. That's really, really important. And hopefully that goes without saying, but just in case, it's a friendly reminder from me to you. Now, you're a special person, whether they're the one studying or they're the one supporting, they will be back and available. They will. All difficult things will eventually come to an end, but it might be a little bit longer than you want it to be. And setting realistic expectations there can be really helpful. Now, I just went through a lot of difficulties. I really want to be clear, and I really want to emphasize this as we start to wrap. This challenge is overcomable. Let me give you the real. This is an extremely competitive landscape. You're talking about competing with the best, the brightest, the most ambitious, sometimes the most cutthroat, sometimes the most ethical, sometimes the most well meaning people in the world, in the business world, in your age bracket. And you're all competing for a limited number of spots at very selective universities. Some people are ex Navy SEALs with gold medals at the Olympics and they're on their third startup. Now, that's not the majority of people, just to be clear, but it's serious stuff. The majority of people are high performing professionals in their respective fields. Okay. So these are hardworking, intelligent, dedicated, good people. And some of you are just going to be so talented, you don't have to work very hard to be super competitive in this applicant pool. But again, the vast majority of you are going to have to work really hard. And for the first time, you're going to be competing with people who work just as hard or harder than you. And this is why you might need to find another gear. This is why it might feel like you're letting go of your past self, past habits. And that can be uncomfortable. But the good news is that if you do not give up, and you keep improving for long enough, you will eventually hit your score. It is a mathematical certainty that if you keep improving, you will get there. It doesn't matter if it's not comfortable. It doesn't matter that you wish it was going faster. Those are all very reasonable desires. I would love for becoming a multi-billionaire and ending world poverty to be easy and stress-free. Like, that sounds great. Sign me up for that. I will be an early adopter for that product. In the meantime, people have been trying to do that stuff and failing at it for a long, long time, probably before recorded history. And so it's unreasonable for me to expect that. It's a totally reasonable thing for me to desire that it be easy. That's a very reasonable desire, hence talking about the emotional side of things. It's a very unreasonable expectation. You don't want to let that emotional desire become your expectation. That is going to create a ton of friction for you with all goal achievement. If you're expecting these huge goals that you want to make happen to be easy, that's going to make things 100 times harder than they need to be. If you expect it to be challenged, if you expect setbacks, if you expect other things to come up out of the blue, like you get promoted at work or you got to fly back east for an important personal event, if you expect that stuff, then you're like, it's not going to even be a setback. It's just going to be normal. But if you're expecting it to be smooth sailing and then even one tiny thing goes wrong, you can totally like drive yourself nuts. So what's important is not the cost, not what it's going to cost you to do it. What's important is whether it's worth it to you. That's how you gauge all investments. All investments are a function of the return. Obviously, the cost factors into that. But even the most expensive investment, if it fits my criteria and it gives me the return I want, now I'm irrational to not do it, if that makes sense. Obviously, there's limits to this, but just speaking in just kind of, I guess, realistic terms. So here's the thing that you want to look at. You want to ask yourself, is this important to me? And am I getting out competed? Is someone else out there just being more persistent than I am? Are they optimizing their plan more often than I am? Are they engaging with the right resources and blocking out the wrong resources more than I am? Are they more focused than I am? Are they more disciplined than I am? Are they better under pressure than I am? All of those things are not meant to mean you're worse than that person or you're like a lesser being. It's not that at all. It's there to help you identify the skill gaps that if you just closed, you could be 10 times better than that person. That smug person who's like, oh, I got a 780 in 2 weeks. And they're like, you're still studying for that thing? You can beat them. If that's important to you, I don't know if it's important to you, but you can. You might have to work 100 times harder than they are, and maybe 100 times harder than you're working right now. Or you might have to just sustain that over a longer period of time. But it is possible. And if others are willing to put 3 years into this to get their score, just maybe check the ego a little bit. Just say, okay, I'm in a very competitive pool. This is an elite group of people, and they might be more skilled than I am right now. And I might have to put in the time and make a bigger commitment and really invest more in this process, if I'm honest with myself. Maybe I've been just wishing that this was going to be easy or expecting it to be easy because it looks like any other test. Maybe I'm about to accept it's totally different and maybe I need some help. But it's worth it to me. I really do want this. This is important. This is a dream for me. And I'm not going to feel as good if I just let it go and just admit that I'm willing to be outcompeted by these other people. This might be one of your biggest accomplishments in the making. This might be the thing that helps you solidify what's been missing for you professionally for a long time. And it could be the foundation for you having the career that you want. Can you really put a price tag on that? I mean, what's a year of studying for this thing for the next 70 years to be incredible or just better? Better for you, better for the people around you. Now, it's not my job to sell you on the MBA. If you're here and you're still listening to this, you're already sold. You already understand the upside, but maybe you haven't dug into that enough. Maybe you need to do some math on the upside. Maybe you need to dig into the specifics of what the return is on this. Maybe you need to get more specific with the vision that you're chasing through this. Maybe it's deeper than just wanting an MBA. Maybe you even need to write down the reasons why you want it to get that extra level of energy to continue. But what I want you to realize is if your plan isn't working, it just means you have the wrong plan, everybody. I'm going to say that again. If your plan isn't working, it means you have the wrong plan. Now, that assumes you're executing. We already went over that. If you're having trouble executing the plan, if you're not executing the plan, then you're the problem. Go back to the discipline episode from a few weeks back and hammer that stuff. That's really important. If you're not executing the plan, then you're the problem. But if you're executing the plan and the plan's not working, it just means you have the wrong plan. Again, you're not a bad person. You don't suck. You're not worthless to society. You're not going to get excommunicated from the tribe or your family. Everybody gets it. They've probably done really hard stuff too. And odds are, I hate to say it, they probably gave up. And you can be an example to them of what not giving up looks like. And that is extremely powerful. Doing amazing things is not normal because the process of doing amazing things usually doesn't feel good. It usually doesn't feel good. Just stick to your diet. It usually doesn't feel good to wake up at exactly the same time every single day. The results of that might feel good. It might make you feel like a strong human to do it. But naturally, that stuff isn't designed to feel good because our bodies were designed to survive, conserve calories, eat as much as possible when the food is in front of us because we might be going through a period of famine. I mean, this is thousands and thousands and thousands of years, probably way more than that. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in the time scale piece of it. But that's deep programming in your body, and many times you're overriding that programming. That's called resistance. It's very very natural to feel resistance if you're trying to go above and beyond, if you're trying to be exceptional. Exceptional by definition is not normal. Normal is people do what feels good. That's the most intuitive thing. And if getting a killer GMAT score and going to Harvard Business School felt good to everybody, everybody would be doing that instead of constantly overeating, spending all their money, etc. Okay. Obviously, those are extreme examples, but you get the idea. Those things feel great. Overindulging, overeating, like pleasure, all that stuff feels good. We're hardwired to seek pleasure, avoid pain. That's why so few people, I mean, honestly, how many people do you meet where you're like, wow, this person's in great shape, seems like they are super well read, and like really seems like someone who could tell me how to be more successful. Like, I mean, it's very unusual. Now, if you're running in elite circles, you're probably seeing it a lot more often than quote unquote normal people do. And a lot of you are in those situations, and that's awesome. You can use that as a positive pressure, positive motivation to level up. But at large, the human population at large, how many people have a top 5 MBA? Like if we really busted out the pie chart, everybody, and we put the real numbers into the Excel, how thin is the slice of the top MBA graduates versus all of humanity on planet Earth? I mean, it might even be invisible. depending on how far you're zoomed out, right? Just let that sink in. It's very unusual. And you can do it. You can join that group if this is important enough to you. But again, you might have to accept that it might be harder than you want it to be. And you might have to accept that your plan is not the right plan and you might have to switch gears. That can be a disappointment. You might feel like you wasted a bunch of time. It's not wasted. You might have needed to go through that first plan to understand that you needed a new plan. That's called science. You have to test the hypothesis, and many tests are going to not pan out. And you might have to iterate, iterate, iterate. Oh, okay, eureka. We got the penicillin. Actually, penicillin's a bad example of that because, well, actually, maybe it's a good example. Anyway, the way that they discovered how to do kidney transplants, don't ask me how I know the history of this scientific discovery, is they were trying to figure out what were they trying to? They were trying to do this study on mice, and they realized when they put the kidneys in the other mice, it just accidentally like ended up working out in this crazy biological way. And that thing that made kidney transplants possible seemed like blind luck, but the scientists had done these experiments 500 times before they kind of quote unquote stumbled upon that thing. Now that's not what you want to do with your GMAT prep. You don't want to just be randomly trying stuff. But the idea is like that is you doing science, is trying the plan A, realizing, okay, that's not taking me where I want to go. I got to pivot. Sometimes that's you being an intelligent, wise, awesome person. It doesn't mean you're a failure, okay? Some of you may have never had to execute that pivot. That's why I'm making this episode for you. It's a brand new experience being like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. Wait, I need to ask for help? That's super uncomfortable. You're used to being able to just do it all on your own. Not that I would know what that's like at all. Uh, but anyway, I feel that maybe I'm going a little too long on this, but I'm trying to come from the heart here. As if you've listened to a lot of my stuff, I typically uh, am operating from a more like structured intellectual place. But hopefully you can feel my commitment to your success in every episode. That is important to me. But I'm sorry if I got a little sidetracked on this. I'm just trying to really, really get under the surface here today. If you want to be in shape intellectually, it's a constant discipline. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it's going to be because you can let go of the judgment that it's difficult and just be excited that it's difficult. That means it's working. It's like a difficult workout. With the right program and the right diligence, you can definitely get your goal score, but try to let go of the expectation that it's going to happen in X time or that it's going to feel awesome. Unless you're a hardcore nerd. Some of you, you're going to breeze through this. It is going to be awesome. You look forward to studying. You look forward to the discipline. You picked the right plan from the beginning. Scores going up. That's awesome. That is so awesome. Please keep going. Don't change. This is for folks who might be struggling or who might hit that point of struggle down the line, or they want other people around them to understand what it's like and what they're going through, and they're having a hard time getting through. Sometimes you're going to be up, sometimes you're going to be down. That's definitely just part of the human experience. You might not be as available as you want to be for social things. You might not be the most active person in your social group for the next few months while you're doing this. The key is to realize that a lot of times the greatest challenges yield the greatest rewards, and that you or the person you care about who is going through this is walking through the fire and is going to come out the other side stronger as long as they don't give up. This period of potential unhappiness might be difficult for you to watch, like I said, and it can be a challenge to go through these things alone and or together. But understand that this is the thing that is probably going to make them the happiest in their life, and it might require a bigger investment than they wanted it to be from the beginning. The people who engage with this process are generally people who crave growth and achievement more than many other things. And they're going to share all the beautiful things about that success that they will inevitably achieve because they're the type of people who just won't take no for an answer. Bless your hearts out there, everybody. You're in this together, you're a team, you're still a team, but you might just be really different people. You might be looking at life differently. And back to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I just feel is such an important book. If you haven't read it, everybody, valuing those differences is part of what makes us stronger as teams. I feel there's like many kumbaya moments in this episode, everybody. I'm sorry if it's like cringe. It's not my intention, but hopefully at least some of it's landing. It's a significant investment. It'll definitely pay off, but it might not be fun in the meantime. So again, think about it like going on a diet. When you're dieting, it's not going to feel good to be hungry for most people. That's unusual. You might be happy you're doing it, you might be proud of yourself, but physically, it's probably going to be an uncomfortable sensation. And you might want to eat sometimes and you might not. Are the results worth it? Well, again, that's up to you. But people who stick to the diet get the result. If you stick to the plan, and you recognize if your plan's not working and find a new plan and then the next plan and then the next plan and you faithfully execute on that plan, eventually you will find the right thing. That's what I did. It's possible for you. And yeah, I had to go through a lot of failures before I eventually did it, but I didn't give up. If you want to be supportive, then you want to ask them how it's going, but you want to recognize as the main thing that they need is time, energy, and fewer distractions on their path to GMAT success. And for hopefully you to handle some more of the day-to-day logistics as much as is fair and possible for you so that they can improve as much as possible. That can be really helpful. That can come in many forms. Might means you're hanging out with your own friend group a little bit less so that they can have some space to themselves in the house for study time. Might mean it takes twice as long as you think it will. Might mean that they're a little cranky sometimes or you're a little cranky sometimes. That's totally natural. It's totally fine. Not a problem. Just got to address it head on, communicate about it, take responsibility for your feelings. None of this has anything to do with you and how important you are to them. In fact, it might be the opposite. They might be pushing themselves so they can be there for you more in the future. And that's an investment. It might hurt in the short term, but pay off in the long term. If they want to talk about it with you, listen to them. Listen to them talk about the test and studying. But don't be afraid to also bring up other topics that you can discuss together that are not related to the exam so that their downtime with you is truly away from the test. Once they've kind of like got it out of their system, don't be afraid to be like, so what else is new? If you have questions about any of this, feel free to reach out anytime. We're at the GMAT strategy on current social channels, and we support future leaders. If you are the type of person who's willing to invest energy into becoming a great leader of the future, or you're the type of person who's around people who are doing that, we want to be on your team and support you as much as we possibly can. If you have questions, we definitely have answers and resources for you, whether you're someone studying for the GMAT or whether you're watching someone study for the GMAT and you don't know what to do or I didn't address your specific situation in the app, feel free to shoot us a DM and we will absolutely get back to you as soon as we can. One final thing, not the final thing. The ability to ask for help is critical as we move forward together. And the culture that we create together as a nation or as a human species, however you prefer to identify, matters. That culture matters. And culture is transferred from seeing examples of that culture embodied. The example we set for other people matters. So if we reach out for help more intelligently and productively, then the people who see us will be more inclined to do that. We don't need to be perfect to be great leaders. I already talked about that. But we should want to keep improving. Constant and never-ending improvement, I think, is very important, very valuable thing to cultivate. And imagine a world where everyone is getting better. I think that's pretty cool. And just final parting thought for real. Yeah, I've been digging into the history of civilization, and I'm going all the way back to like ancient Mesopotamia and sort of the birth of what we can observe as civilization. And it's crazy to think that while we're 6,000 years into this thing, we're probably still barely just scratching the surface of what civilization's going to be. Like the humanity and civilization is probably going to continue for a lot longer than 5,000 years. So we're actually in a pivotal place where we can shape the future of what this whole thing looks like. If you don't believe me, watch that famous Steve Jobs interview. I think it's from the 90s where he talks about how the world is just made up of ideas of people who are no more intelligent than you are. And a lot of that is true. And we have the ability to shape it. And if you're considering becoming a high level leader, you are going to have huge opportunities to be a role model for how you want people to treat each other, how you want the world to look, and how you want this whole thing called human life to go. And maybe what you're going through right now is an important chapter in that process. And if you're that type of person who's willing to endure a lot of the difficult things along that path, I want you to know you're not alone. And this is a huge reason I'm making these episodes for you. And that I want to help you out. Okay. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, and check out our free video on how to achieve your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. In the meantime, this is a weekly show, so please subscribe. And as always, stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. I'll talk to you all soon.